Pagan music, pagan song. If it wasn't a part of paganism, it would be like a third of your body's missing. I mean, it is so deeply rooted in paganism that if you're pagan and you don't, use some kind of practice, some kind of song, that just to me it makes me wonder, because I personally couldn't be pagan without the song. The pagan instruments and pagan songs are completely different than modern day instruments and modern day songs. I will say one thing though, sometimes you can get lucky, especially with something like a flute, because flutes are unique in the fact that a lot of them have retained, maybe not the way they necessarily look, but have retained the voice, the energy of the way that depending on the key, I will say that there are certain keys, that even in a modern day instrument can have the right voice to it, and it's perfect for pagan music, even though it wasn't pagan made. You yourself can make it pagan through your own intent and through your own magic. But basically, most of the time, they're vastly different. Like a pagan drum versus a modern day, even acoustic, not even electric, just acoustic drum set. Night and day difference. Not only do they sound different, but they look completely different. Sometimes, if you're using it for a very specific purpose, the energy might not, on its own, might not be enough. It might have to also be made a certain way, out of something specifically, made out of specific, and then made a certain way, because everything has meaning, even going down to like the materials that you use and the way that you carve something, just the way that you do something. I'll give a short example, and we're running out of daylight, but I'm going to try see if you can see this. This is just a regular old modern day shepherd's flute, but if you look at this, do you see that mouthpiece? Do you see how that mouthpiece is? Okay, so that mouthpiece is one of, not the only, but one of the oldest ways that I know we were, pagan invented making that kind of mouthpiece thousands of years ago, and yet somehow it survived on this modern day flute. I don't define, now this is ancient paganism that I teach. I don't teach the modern day paganism. I teach what our ancestors used to believe in, what our ancestors, the wisdom of our ancestors. So what I call pagan music, is how I defined it, is the energy, the heart, the soul of the music. If it feels and sounds with the right kind of energy, then you can make that pagan. But it's not a said particular song necessarily. A lot of us will kind of just, we'll take an instrument and we'll just start playing, and we'll be guided, and we'll let ourselves be guided to play whatever is played. We may or may not know where the song came from, but it's like a feeling of being guided, where you just start playing, even completely pull it out of your own head and nowhere else, not even being guided. It doesn't necessarily have to have any kind of Odin famous root to it. There are some very widely known pagan songs out there, just like anything else, but that's not all that there is. That's not what makes it pagan necessarily. It's the heart of it that makes it pagan. That's the biggest thing, the energy. Unless you're using it again for something very specific, you may need it made out of a certain thing and made a certain way by a certain person or whatever. But if it's not that specific, then usually you can get away with, just as long as it has the right energy and as long as you're creating the right kinds of songs with it. But the problem is, if it has the wrong energy, it is not going to be able to play the songs that you want to play on it. It's not going to be able to play the right kind of sound. So energy really is more important than who made it and how it was made, unless you've got a very specific purpose for it, and then that might be really important. Why do we use this? What is the purpose of pagan music? It's got an energy to it that nothing else does, and nothing can replace it, for one thing. For another thing, we actually do define it as, and it's getting dusk, I might have to turn on a light, we actually do define it as a category or a genre of magic. So song is actually considered magic. You can use it for protection magic, healing magic, cleansing magic, war magic, influence magic. There are so many different types of magic that you can, depending on the song, use it for. But again, it's also very, very sentimental. There's a heart, there's a soul to it, and it becomes a part of your own soul. It's that important. Again, if you're pagan and you don't use some type of music, I don't care whether it's your own voice or an instrument or whatever, I really begin to wonder about you, because to me, I look at you and a third of you is missing. I mean, that is just, I can't even express into words how important this is in paganism. I'm going to be showing you at least all of the kinds of instruments that I work with, that I'm used to working with. I'm not really going to focus on a lot of the stuff that I don't use. Sometimes I may take something out and demonstrate, or at least show you what something looks like, but I can't guarantee that because I'd have to have sacred permission to do any of this. When you're talking about something like that, if you haven't looked at the basic skills, sacred permission video, just basic rules of paganism, that video, anyone will tell you can't just whip something out like that for no reason unless you've got sacred permission. So some of this stuff I'm not going to be able to bring everything out, but I can bring a lot of it out probably, and if not play, at least show you. I do really think it helps for people to get a visual and even audio example of the difference and learn to recognize that difference between pagan and modern day. If I haven't said already, a lot of modern day music is heavily influenced, or at least mildly, moderately influenced by pagan in some way, by pagan music, even if we don't mean to. Especially a lot of those penny whistle and shepherd's flute type flutes. If you hear that kind of flute in a song, it's eerily similar a lot of time, not all the time, a lot of times it is eerily similar to the kinds of energy that we pagans will use the same sorts of instruments with. So I do have to turn on the light, so that's a lot better. It got dusk when I turned on the light. There's a lot of specific scenarios where if you did not have song, you could not get said magic accomplished without that. There's nothing that would replace it. If you didn't have song, you would not be able to do whatever you're trying to do, whether it's a ritual or just general certain type of magic. And really that's why it's considered its own genre, of magic. So now we're going to get into the individual. I'm just going to give you a little bit as to what one thing means. And be forewarned that a lot of these different instruments, they can be used for so many different reasons, depending on what song you're using. But I'm just going to go in general, kind of the meaning for each. So we're going to start with the flute. That's a really, really common, everybody kind of knows about that. Great for influence, great for trance or altered state of mind, good for healing, protection, I mean, it's just a really all-around diverse, but I'd say its greatest power is probably influence. Probably. Because it can be used for a lot of things. Drum. Drum has a lot of really strong protection and cleansing energy. Rattle. The rattle actually is good for for the opposite of what the flute's good for. The rattle is good for breaking up and dispersing any kind of really dense, heavy energy. So a rattle will actually ground you, whereas a flute will unground you. So that's interesting. And rattle, I don't mean a little baby rattle again. Pagan rattle looks a lot different than your typical rattle. So don't think I'm talking. Those of you who've only heard of the only rattle that you've ever heard of is like a baby. No, pagan rattles are actually can be made of a lot of different things. It can be made of bone, wood, even like a rawhide, the shells. I mean, there's so many different things. A rattle, horns. I mean, I could go on and on about what that can be made out a hollow wooden, that you put something on the end. It's just, I mean, they all look very different, they all sound very different, but I've not yet to see a rattle that did not have that sort of grounding energy to it. It just kind of disperses stuff, it just kind of fizzles stuff out. So let's see, what else do I want to... Sometimes it can also have a calming effect. War horns, or I call them war horns, some people call them sounding horns. They are usually in pagan, in pagan sounding horns, that they're made out of some kind of actual horn, like a real horn from an animal. And it's the hollowed out sheath of the horn. It's not the bone part, it's just the outer part of the horn that it's made out of. And as the name suggests, typically used for protection magic, war magic. Can be really good for creating, a cloaking or warding spell. Has some shielding properties to it, also has some cleansing properties to it. And again, I'm just going off the top of my head, in general. I'm not giving you every little thing that these can be used for. So if I haven't mentioned something about something and you wonder, well, what about this reason? Well, it would take too long for me to tell you all the different things. So just know that if I didn't mention it, it's just because I'm very quickly, listing off the top of my head, usually the main things that they're reason why they're being used. The more common purposes that I can think of off the top of my head. I have a human brain. My human brain is tiny and small and probably doesn't remember everything off the top of my head like this. So if I forget something, I apologise. But I think I mentioned most of the more common stuff that all of these are typically used for. And actually I'm going to include the voice, your own voice, your own human voice as an instrument, because actually that is quite powerful. If you don't have a flute, your own voice can end up being a good sister or sort of twin or brother to the flute, because whilst it doesn't do the same thing a flute does, your own voice still has the potential to, work good in healing, protection, potentially influence, depending on what song. Does it have a real strong point? Not really. It depends on the individual person as to what the individual person's voice's strong point is. It's your voice. So your energy, whatever your energy is going to add on to what you can do with it, if that makes any sense.